The biting Atlantic spray was a brutal slap, cold enough to make him wince. Caleb turned his face away from the wind, thinking what a pathetic waste Leo Thorne had turned out to be. During the fight for the inheritance, he'd only ever dared to scheme from behind their father's back. Now, after Aiden had thoroughly dismantled him, he still didn't have the nerve for a clean kill on American soil. Instead, he'd resorted to this charade. A clandestine abduction, a yacht trip into international waters, all to create the illusion of an unfortunate accident. It was irritating. Last night's marathon session with Aiden had left him drained, without an ounce of strength. He couldn't even work the rope loose from his wrists. Still, a wry sense of satisfaction curled within him. If he had to die, at least he'd gone out with a bang. He only worried about Aiden. The man was already teetering on the edge of a particular kind of madness. Finding out Caleb was dead might push him over completely. As his mind drifted through these chaotic thoughts, a laugh escaped his lips. The sound seemed to shatter Leo's composure. Leo's voice was sharp with disbelief as he questioned how Caleb could possibly find humor in his own impending death. Caleb raised an eyebrow, his expression mocking. He found the idea of Leo living every day in paranoia, looking over his shoulder, immensely gratifying. "You!" Leo sputtered, words failing him. With a flick of his wrist, two burly men seized Caleb by the arms, hauled him to the railing, and unceremoniously heaved him overboard. The shock of the frigid ocean was absolute, a crushing weight that stole his breath. As he closed his eyes, his mind filled with flashes of Aiden. Aiden laughing, Aiden's rare moments of tenderness, Aiden's terrifying rage. But mostly, he saw Aiden above him, his face a mask of restrained, desperate passion. The salt water flooded his lungs, extinguishing the last flicker of oxygen. Just as he surrendered to the end, a violent surge of air rushed back into him, electrifying every cell. The endless expanse of gray water vanished, replaced by the quiet, opulent interior of a Greenwich estate. "The boy must be overwhelmed with excitement," Richard Thorne remarked with a strained laugh to the man sitting across from him, while discreetly digging his fingers into Caleb's arm. Caleb irritably slapped the hand away. As the scene solidified around him, recognition dawned. He was reborn. Thrown back 7 years to the day Richard Thorne had dragged him to the Sterling family home for a business proposal/matchmaking ordeal. Richard, after years of philandering, had a brood of illegitimate sons but no daughters. With Thorne Industries circling the drain, he'd concocted a desperate plan for a corporate marriage. No prominent family wanted their daughter shackled to a sinking ship, so he decided to offer up a son. After assessing his options and learning that Preston Sterling, of the family's secondary branch, was interested in men, he had lured Caleb here under false pretenses. Lured because Caleb despised him. He hated him for parading his bastards into their home until the stress gave his mother a fatal heart attack. He hated him for his casual neglect, a stark contrast to the doting affection he showered on his other children. In his previous life, Caleb had thrown a spectacular tantrum at this meeting, humiliating Richard. Goaded by Leo's whispers and panicked by the company's mounting losses, Richard had blamed Caleb for everything, beating him before casting him out and cutting him off completely. Leo, never one to leave a job half-finished, had then sent thugs to hunt him down. It was during that desperate flight that a man had saved him. Caleb lifted his head, his eyes fixing on the figure descending the grand staircase. Even in a simple black cashmere sweater, Aiden Sterling possessed an innate, commanding grace that no garment could conceal. That face, the one Caleb had touched, slapped, and bitten, was as coolly handsome as ever. But Caleb knew that beneath the stoic, disciplined exterior lay a terrifyingly possessive and fanatical man. It was strange. It had only been a couple of hours since he'd last seen him, yet an intense longing ached in his chest. Richard saw him too, practically vibrating with excitement. Restrained by the company present, he couldn't stand, but he hissed at Caleb to engage with Preston. Caleb glanced at Preston, whose face had the bland, unappealing quality of a water cracker, then back at the devastatingly handsome Aiden. He mentally rolled his eyes at his father's sheer audacity, trying to force this garbage down his throat. Preston, who seemed pleased enough with the arrangement, extended a clammy hand toward Caleb's. Caleb snatched his own hand back. He remembered this creature. Preston wasn't just unappealing to look at. His character was rotten. In his past life, after Caleb was disowned, Preston had tracked him down and offered to keep him as a lover, promising a life of continued comfort. Thankfully, Leo's obsessive need to see Caleb utterly ruined had interfered, creating the chaos Caleb needed to escape. As Preston's face contorted with bruised pride, Caleb stood up. He pointed directly at the man who had just reached the bottom of the stairs. "I'll consider the proposal." But with him, there were 5 people in the room. Apart from Caleb and Aiden, the other 3 wore masks of varying shock. Richard's astonishment quickly morphed into a calculated assessment that this new development was even better. He lowered his head, feigning ignorance. Preston's face was a livid shade of purple. His father rose, his voice dripping with condescension as he dismissed them, stating that if the Thorns looked down on his son, then the matter was closed and they were not welcome. Being thrown out of the Sterling home was no surprise. As they left, Caleb felt a familiar, piercing gaze on his back. He turned his head and met Aiden's eyes, deep, cool, and filled with an inscrutable darkness. Caleb offered him a small, knowing smile before turning and walking out of the mansion. He saw Aiden again at a charity gala. Caleb was slouched on a velvet sofa, picking at canapés and half listening to his friend Mason's incessant chatter. Mason reported that Richard was shamelessly parading Leo around town, a detail that didn't surprise Caleb in the least. His father, blaming him for sabotaging the merger, had washed his hands of him to focus on grooming his precious favorite. Caleb was happy for the freedom. He feigned a life of idle indulgence while secretly hiring investigators to dig into Leo's affairs. The debt for his murder in a past life had to be paid. As he and Mason were talking, a ripple of excitement went through the room. Heads turned toward the entrance. Mason stood on his toes to get a better look, reporting that Aiden Sterling had just arrived. A murmur went through the crowd, people wondering why the future head of the Sterling Empire would grace such a minor event. Many immediately moved to greet him. Caleb's gaze followed Aiden as he politely deflected sycophants, exchanged a few words with the host, and then slipped away toward the rear garden. Caleb rose and followed. Just as he reached the garden entrance, a young woman in a designer gown ran out, her hand pressed to her cheek as if she'd been slapped. Caleb arched an eyebrow. As he prepared to enter, a voice he despised called his name. Leo Thorne leaned against the doorframe, his eyes glinting with scorn. He taunted Caleb, asking if he was so desperate to climb the social ladder that he was now chasing Aiden after deeming his nephew unworthy. Caleb crossed his arms, studying the man who had killed him. He couldn't say it was pure hatred he felt. In the brutal world of corporate dynasties, power and money often trumped life itself. Given the chance, he would have been just as ruthless. He could only blame his own past foolishness for losing the fight. But he had no time to waste on verbal sparring now. He merely commented that it was true he found Preston beneath him, and suggested Leo ask their father to offer him up for the merger instead. Leo's face darkened. He knew perfectly well that as an illegitimate son, no matter how favored, he would never be considered a legitimate piece on the board. He sneered, saying he looked forward to watching Aiden throw Caleb out, and as a parting shot, relayed that their father had decreed if Caleb didn't want to come home, he should stay away for good. As Leo's silhouette faded down the hall, Caleb sighed dramatically. He spoke to the empty space behind him. "You heard that, Mr. Sterling? I have nowhere to go. Maybe you could take me in." The opportunity was served on a silver platter. Aiden emerged from behind a row of sculpted hedges, his gaze sweeping over Caleb impassively. Caleb met his stare without flinching, even taking 2 steps closer. He let his expression soften, his voice becoming a playful purr. "So, what do you say, Aiden?" In his past life, Aiden had loved it when Caleb used that tone, forcing him to repeat his name in bed, moaning it between pleas for mercy, while Aiden only drove deeper. Caleb wasn't sure if this Aiden's feelings were as intense as they had become in the past, but he was certain of one thing: Aiden couldn't refuse him. He knew because on the nightstand in Aiden's bedroom, there had always been a photograph of Caleb from high school. Yes, he'd been watching him since then. With a wave to a stunned Mason, Caleb slid into the passenger seat of Aiden's car. The car bypassed the Grand Sterling estate, heading instead to Aiden's private penthouse. It wasn't the secluded house where Aiden had kept him before, but from the Spartan, impeccable decor, it was clearly where he spent most of his time. Caleb's head swiveled, taking in the vast, empty space. It was cool and silent, without even a housekeeper in sight. The driver had dropped them off and left immediately. That was Aiden's way. He appeared civilized and polite, but his possessiveness was absolute. He despised others encroaching on his personal domain. Aiden opened the door to a guest bedroom, his voice a low murmur as he explained that the room was unused and Caleb could stay there. Caleb barely glanced inside. He turned back, asking where Aiden slept. Aiden didn't answer, merely fixing him with a deep, bottomless gaze that threatened to pull him in. Seeing that outwardly proper demeanor, Caleb couldn't resist. He leaned in close, his voice a whisper. "Aiden, you do know what it means to bring someone home who's completely infatuated with you, don't you?" Aiden's fingers caught his chin, lifting his face. A flicker of something fierce, almost brutal, crossed his eyes as he asked what Caleb meant by begging a man he barely knew to take him in. "Look at that. Not even in a relationship and already jealous." Caleb blinked innocently. He replied that it wasn't just any man. He'd asked because it was Aiden. He reminded him that he'd already stated his interest back at the house. His hand crept up to rest on Aiden's chest, feeling the fine material of his custom-tailored suit. The signal was unmistakable. In their last life, they would have been tearing at each other's clothes by now. But this time, just as Aiden moved to capture his wandering hand, Caleb slipped away, darting into the bedroom. "All right, it's late. See you tomorrow, Aiden." He shut the door with a soft click. He was starving for the man, but Aiden's controlling nature was too intense. It needed to be reined in. He had no desire to be a prisoner again. After a quick shower, he pushed open the bathroom door and came face to face with a dog. "Zoe." He recognized the Rottweiler and instinctively took a step back. This was Aiden's dog, a powerful, intelligent, and fiercely protective animal. Her one flaw was a temper. She listened only to Aiden. In his past life, it had taken a great deal of effort to earn her trust. But now, this was their first meeting. He was genuinely afraid she would take a piece out of him. Zoe stared at him, a low growl rumbling in her chest. The next second, she launched herself at him. There was no time to run. The impact sent him stumbling backward, the small of his back slamming into the bathroom door handle. Pain exploded behind his eyes, and a sharp cry escaped his lips. The dog, nearly 100 pounds of solid muscle, pinned him down. Just as he thought he would die a second, more absurd death by dog, Aiden's sharp command cut through the air. "Zoe, stop." The dog immediately released him and moved to the side. The weight was gone, but the agony in his back remained. He sat on the floor, clutching his waist, gasping. That bastard. Was he trying to have him murdered by a canine? Furious, he glared toward the doorway. Aiden was standing there, having changed from his suit into simple loungewear. Their eyes met. Aiden's expression was unreadable, but his gaze drifted downward. Caleb then realized the towel he'd wrapped around his waist had been clawed loose by Zoe and was barely covering him. He managed to resist the impulse to let it drop entirely, instead fumbling to secure it. The timing was wrong, and besides, the dog was still watching him intently. He struggled to his feet, holding his back. Aiden, showing a sliver of conscience, came over and helped him. Caleb immediately started whimpering about the pain. Aiden guided him to the bed and gently turned him over to inspect the injury. His voice had lost its earlier coolness as he said he would get some ointment. He led the watchful Zoe out of the room on his way out. 2 minutes later, Aiden returned with a tube of balm. Before Caleb could speak, Aiden sat on the edge of the bed. Caleb rolled onto his stomach, exposing his back. Aiden looked at the expanse of smooth, unguarded skin and his throat tightened. He squeezed a generous amount of the cool ointment onto his palm and pressed it gently against the blooming bruise. Aiden's touch was not rough. His large, warm hand moved in slow circles over Caleb's lower back, the motion achingly familiar. It was just like after they'd made love and Caleb's back ached. Aiden would rub it just like this, soothing him to sleep. These last few days, his nerves had been stretched taut. He was terrified this was all a dream, that he would wake up back in the cold ocean. He was constantly on guard against Leo's next move, sleeping in fitful bursts. The constant stress was taking its toll. His body was warm, and the massage was lulling him into a state of deep relaxation. His eyelids grew heavy, and he turned his head to the side, sinking into sleep. He dreamed of Aiden again, of those first 2 months after he'd left the Thorn Mansion. Leo had immediately begun his campaign of terror, determined to grind him into the dirt. To survive, Caleb had hidden in a tiny rental apartment for 2 weeks, burning through his last dollar before finding a job at a 24-hour bodega downstairs. 12-hour shifts for minimum wage, barely enough to live on. He'd thought that was his future, a bleak, aimless existence, until Aiden Sterling had stormed back into his life. Leo had discovered where he was working and sent a group of thugs to harass him, blocking the entrance and scaring off customers. The owner, wanting no trouble, had fired him on the spot. Frustrated and now broke, Caleb's temper had snapped. He'd thrown a punch at the lead thug. They had swarmed him instantly, a rain of fists and feet that beat the words from his throat. In that moment, he'd thought it might be better to just die. Maybe he'd be reincarnated as a rich kid again. Yes, he was that pathetic. But he hadn't died. Aiden had appeared out of nowhere and saved him. Aiden and his driver, just 2 of them, had methodically taken apart the entire group of thugs, leaving them groaning on the pavement. Then Aiden had scooped Caleb's bloodied body into his arms and carried him to his car. At first, Caleb had wondered why a man of Aiden Sterling's stature would bother with him. The answer became clear when he woke up, wrapped in bandages, a prisoner in a secluded mansion. He saw the dark, searing look in Aiden's eyes and finally understood. He wanted him. He had resisted fiercely. He'd slapped him, hit him, even kicked him where it counted most. Aiden never got angry. He'd simply asked if Caleb's hand hurt from hitting him. That was the moment Caleb knew. The man was a lunatic and he would probably never be free of him. He just never imagined that one day, he would willingly choose to live a second life with him. News that Caleb was living with Aiden spread quickly. Leo stopped bothering him. Mason couldn't contain his curiosity, demanding to know what was going on. Caleb didn't bother hiding it, telling him plainly that he was pursuing Aiden and would let him know when there was good news. Mason was aghast, pointing out that Aiden was 31 and Caleb was only 22. It was cradle robbing even if Aiden was handsome. Caleb glanced toward the study where Aiden was on a conference call. The age difference was a sore spot for Aiden. Once, Caleb had tried to go out and Aiden had stopped him. In a fit of pique, Caleb had called him an old man. The reaction was explosive. He hadn't been able to get out of bed for 2 days. He warned Mason never to say that to Aiden's face. Mason grumbled that he wasn't an idiot, then remembered something else. He asked how Caleb ended up with the uncle when he was supposed to be set up with the nephew, calling the situation scandalous. Caleb just laughed, saying there was more scandal to come. When Mason asked what, Caleb deadpanned that the tech venture Mason had invested in 2 months ago just went bankrupt. He had been living at Aiden's for nearly a week. Their routine was simple. They left together in the morning, Aiden to his office, Caleb to his university classes. In the afternoons, he'd occasionally drop by the crumbling offices of Thorn Industries to dig for evidence, or he'd go home to paint. During his captivity, to keep him from descending into madness, Aiden had forced him to study painting for 2 years. While he wasn't a master, he had become proficient. It was a skill, something to prove he wasn't completely useless anymore. He was planning to paint the scene of his first post-rebirth encounter with Aiden. Aiden came home early today, so Caleb moved his easel into the study. The older man, engrossed in his work, merely glanced up without comment. Caleb had been testing his boundaries for days, entering his bedroom, snooping around his study. Aiden had allowed it all, though sometimes he would watch Caleb with the predatory stillness of a hunter observing its prey. With a lollipop stick clenched between his teeth, Caleb added the final stroke, then leaned back, satisfied with his work. He was about to show it to Aiden when a knock came at the study door. Aiden's assistant entered. He placed a file on the desk but lingered, looking hesitant. When Aiden prompted him, the assistant glanced covertly at Caleb before explaining that the matriarch requested Aiden's presence at the family estate that evening. Caleb set his painting down, the smile fading from his face. The matriarch, Aiden's mother. In his past life, she had been a major force behind Leo's ability to snatch him from Aiden's villa. She could not accept her precious son being involved with another man, even after Aiden had defied her for 5 years. Her disapproval was a large part of why Aiden had kept him locked away. Clearly, she knew of Caleb's existence now and was summoning Aiden to stir up trouble. Aiden's gaze lowered as he gave a quiet acknowledgement. The assistant, visibly relieved, quickly excused himself. All thoughts of showing Aiden the painting vanished. Caleb stood and slowly walked around the massive desk. Under Aiden's questioning gaze, he settled himself directly onto his lap. If he didn't secure his place now, he'd be dealing with endless drama later. He wasn't a good person. He had no interest in placating some old woman. All he knew was that Aiden Sterling could only be his. He wrapped his arms around Aiden's neck. "Are you coming back tonight?" he asked. Aiden's expression remained neutral, but his body went rigid. His eyes, fixed on Caleb's face, burned with a restrained fire, a desire he was struggling to suppress. Caleb truly didn't understand what Aiden was holding back. In his past life, the man had been insatiable. This time, Caleb had come to him willingly, yet Aiden was acting with such reserve. He tightened his arms, pulling Aiden's head down slightly, and repeated the question. Aiden's breath hitched. A large hand clamped onto Caleb's waist, pulling him closer, forcing his head back. The clear, controlled eyes were now swirling with a storm. "Caleb Thorne," he rasped, "do you have any idea what you're doing?" Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Of course I do." And without another moment of hesitation, he kissed him. It was a light, fleeting touch, but it was enough to break the storm's equilibrium. Aiden's hand shot up to cup the back of his head, and a torrent of kisses rained down on him, fierce and possessive. The familiar scent and taste of Aiden swept through him, and a soft moan of satisfaction escaped his lips. After a long moment, Aiden pulled back. His thumb, hot against Caleb's skin, traced his swollen lips. Aiden's gaze was scorching. "Caleb, you started this." Caleb initiated the next kiss himself. He knew. Last time it was Aiden's turn. This time it was his. Thorn Industries was already on life support, but Richard Thorne was desperately trying to maintain a facade of solvency. While Aiden was dealing with his mother, Richard learned of Caleb's new living situation and called him immediately. His voice was oozing a nauseatingly false affection as he called Caleb a good boy, marveling at his ability to get close to Aiden Sterling. It was the classic tactic of someone who disdained you but now desperately needed something from you. Caleb had never heard this tone from him before, and he didn't like it now. Sensing Caleb's disinterest, Richard hurried on, admitting he had wronged him in the past and begging him, for his mother's sake, to help the family company. Caleb's voice was laced with scorn. He questioned which part of his mother's memory he should honor, the part where she walked in on Richard with another woman, or the part where her husband's illegitimate son was treated better than her own. He told Richard his nerve was truly impressive. Enraged, Richard hung up. Caleb immediately opened his email. The files had arrived an hour ago. Concrete proof of Thorn Industries tax evasion and fraud. He had Mason find a discreet contact to deliver the evidence to the IRS. Mason was stunned. He remarked that Caleb had gotten smarter, joking that chasing Aiden Sterling must have jump-started his brain. He added that Caleb seemed to have matured overnight, making him feel like an amateur by comparison. Caleb just rolled his eyes, correcting him that it wasn't chasing, it was a relationship. Mason's eyes went wide, amazed at his speed. Caleb smiled. 5 years of near-constant proximity to Aiden Sterling was bound to have an effect. Mason mused that perhaps he needed to find a smart partner to level himself up. Tomorrow was Mason's birthday, and he was insisting on an all-night party at a club. Caleb, wanting to be with Aiden, refused, but was pressured into drinking heavily. Feeling drowsy, he closed his eyes, planning to rest for a bit before heading home. After a few minutes, a strange heat began to spread through his body. His eyes snapped open. Shit, he'd been drugged. The lighting in their private booth was dim. Mason was engrossed in a drinking game with some other friends. Caleb was about to call out to him when a girl materialized at his side. Her eyes were wide, her voice a syrupy whisper as she asked if he was feeling unwell and offered a massage. His throat was becoming increasingly dry. He impatiently pushed her away, but she clung to his arm. At that moment he felt a familiar, intense gaze. He looked up toward the entrance of the booth and met a pair of eyes lurking in the shadows. They were dark, possessive, like invisible chains tightening around him. The girl's hand started to creep toward his chest. His heart hammered. Pushing through the drug-induced haze, he shot to his feet. When he looked back, Aiden was gone. "What's wrong?" Mason called out, finally noticing the commotion. "Shit, Mason, she's a problem. Check her out for me," Caleb gritted out, shaking the girl off before sprinting out of the booth to find Aiden. Aiden's jealousy was legendary. Caleb had experienced its full force in his past life. He burst out of the club and saw Aiden's car parked at the curb. Without hesitation, he jumped into the passenger seat. Before he could utter a word of explanation, a heavy presence pressed down on him. Aiden grabbed his arm, and a searing kiss crushed against his lips. This was not the tenderness of the other night. This was a man intending to devour him whole. The drug was already coursing through his veins, and the intensity of the kiss made him feel like he was about to combust. They were still in the car. He couldn't let this go any further. He pressed his hands against Aiden's chest, trying to push him away. It was like trying to move a mountain. Aiden seemed to take it as a challenge, the hand at the back of his neck tightening. Caleb felt his breath being stolen, consumed by Aiden. Just as he was about to break, a wave of dizzying pleasure exploded in his mind. A soft gasp escaped him. Aiden finally recognized his state, pulling back slightly, though his lips still hovered over Caleb's. Fearing he would start again, Caleb panted out an explanation. He told him he'd been drugged and that it wasn't what it looked like. The ferocity in Aiden's eyes slowly receded. His breathing was hot, his gaze drifting downward. Terrified of what that look implied, Caleb cupped his face, pleading with him not to look, mortified by how flushed he must be. A faint smile touched Aiden's lips. "All right, I won't look." It was the first time he had seen him smile in this new life. The drug was potent. Aiden got them back to the penthouse in a record 20 minutes. The moment the door closed, Caleb was on him, two feverish bodies tangling together. On the bed, Aiden pinned him down, but then he suddenly went still. "What's wrong?" Caleb asked. Aiden's hot breath ghosted across his neck. His voice was thick with restraint as he murmured his name. "Caleb." It was a simple word, but in that instant, everything clicked into place. He thought about his past life, how Aiden hated being called an old man, how he couldn't even stand to hear Caleb compliment another actor's looks on TV. He thought about the conflict he'd seen in Aiden's eyes these past few weeks. A small laugh escaped him. He reached up and gently pinched his cheek. "You're not worried about the age difference, are you?" Aiden's eyes were moist with suppressed emotion, making him look strangely vulnerable. He didn't answer, just kept staring at him. Caleb brushed the hair from his forehead, studying his face before speaking with earnest sincerity. "You're so handsome. I was worried I was too young for you." At those words, a dark light ignited in Aiden's eyes, and he surged downward. And so, the effects of the drug were worked out of his system again and again. Drifting in and out of consciousness, Caleb had one last coherent thought. Surely Aiden wouldn't lock him up this time. After all, he had been the one to initiate everything. When he woke again, it was the afternoon of the next day. Aiden was gone. The curtains were drawn tight, letting in only a sliver of light. His throat was parched. Fumbling for the lamp, he saw a glass of water on the nightstand. He drank it gratefully. Then he found his phone, covered in missed calls from Mason, Richard, and Leo. He called Mason back first. Mason answered immediately, his voice frantic as he asked if Caleb was okay. After reassuring him, Caleb asked about the girl from last night. Mason cursed, explaining that Leo and Preston had set it all up. One was to drug Caleb and arrange for a girl to be with him, while the other was to bring Aiden to witness the scene, all to ruin their relationship. The girl they hired was new to the game and had hesitated, which was the only reason the plan hadn't fully succeeded. It was what Caleb had suspected. Only those two would be desperate enough to try something so clumsy. Mason also had news about Leo. The evidence had been submitted last night. Richard and Leo Thorne had been taken into federal custody that morning. That explained the flurry of calls followed by silence. After getting the details, Caleb hung up. Seconds later, Aiden pushed the door open. "You're awake." Aiden was in loungewear, two distinct love bites visible on his neck. He came to the bed and felt Caleb's forehead. Satisfied he didn't have a fever, he asked if he was hungry. Caleb nodded. As he spoke, Aiden leaned down and brushed a soft kiss against his lips. The familiar, casual gesture sent a jolt through him. "What is it?" Aiden asked. Caleb studied his face intently, then shook his head. "Nothing." The tax case against Thorne Industries was massive. Leo was released after 2 days of questioning, but Richard wasn't so lucky. The afternoon Leo got out, a call from a blocked number came through. It was Richard. He was begging Caleb to help him. Caleb, crunching on a handful of almonds, leisurely replied that he couldn't. Richard, apparently truly desperate, dropped all pretense of anger, his voice taking on a tone of remorse. He claimed that the company's tax issues weren't that severe and that someone was framing them. He tried to scare Caleb, suggesting that after they got him, Caleb would be next. This mixture of pleading and threats was tiresome. Caleb had no interest in continuing the conversation. "They won't be," he said calmly, "because the person who framed you was me." There was a stunned silence on the other end, followed by a stream of vitriolic cursing. "Hey, don't be in such a hurry to curse," Caleb interrupted. "I only submitted the evidence. The rest was the work of your other wonderful son." Richard was incredulous, insisting Leo would never do such a thing. Caleb scoffed. Of course he would. In the last life, as soon as Caleb was out of the picture, Leo had hollowed out Thorne Industries and started his own company. No one wanted to operate under the stigma of being an illegitimate son forever. "Who was in charge of your internal data security?" Caleb asked. Richard went silent. The person in charge was Leo's maternal uncle. Caleb had simply sent someone to inform the uncle that Thorne Industries was about to collapse and offered him a chance to make one last big score. The uncle had handed over all the data without a second thought, making sure to cover his own tracks. He knew the company was doomed anyway. After a long pause, Richard hung up without another word. Caleb knew he would investigate, but it was a shame he wouldn't find Leo, because Leo was now in Caleb's possession. I have to go out for a bit. He turned to the other person on the sofa. For some reason, Aiden hadn't gone to work for the past 2 days. He was a constant presence, barely letting Caleb out of his sight. The behavior was unsettlingly familiar, and Caleb feared he was sliding back into his old patterns. But at least his mood was stable, and he was still open to discussion. Aiden simply gave a slight nod of agreement. See? A normal relationship was so much better. Delighted, Caleb kissed him soundly on both cheeks, but was immediately pulled back by a firm hand on his waist for a proper, bruising kiss that left him breathless. As Aiden finally released him, he tried to pop one of the almonds from his hand into Aiden's mouth, but stopped short. Almost forgot, he murmured, pulling his hand back. You're allergic to almonds. Aiden's breath caught for a fraction of a second. When he spoke, his voice was normal, but his eyes held a new, strange tenderness as he stroked Caleb's waist. Be back soon. Mason was holding Leo in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. When Caleb arrived, Leo was bound and slumped against a wall, breathing heavily. A passport and a plane ticket lay discarded on the dusty floor. Caleb had to laugh. That was Leo's solution to everything: run. Especially now when he had nothing left to his name. Catching him had been laughably easy. Caleb Thorne, what do you want? Leo demanded, struggling against his restraints until his wrists were raw. Nothing much. Caleb picked up a metal pipe, testing its weight. Just tying up loose ends. He was only trying to scare him. He broke one of his hands. He had no desire to have a man's life on his conscience. Watching Leo pass out from the pain, a pathetic heap on the ground, Caleb felt no surge of vengeful satisfaction. His previous life had been consumed by hatred and pointless rivalry. He'd never stopped to think about what he actually wanted. Now he knew. Wasting time on people like this was pointless. He'd rather be in bed with Aiden. He sent Leo's location to Richard. He knew that for his father, the bottom line had always been more important than any of his sons, even his favorite. 2 days later, Leo was indicted. The charges, tax evasion and money laundering, were extensive enough to keep him in prison for decades. Richard was sentenced to several years as well. He sent messages asking Caleb to visit him. Caleb refused. He had absolutely no energy left. He thought that by taking the initiative this time, life would be easier. He was wrong. It didn't matter if it was the past Aiden or the present Aiden. The man was a goddamn lunatic. He looked so cool and refined on the surface, but in bed he was relentless. The past 2 days had been especially intense, as if something had agitated him. He clung to Caleb constantly, following him from room to room. Caleb even recalled that after he'd dealt with Leo, he'd caught a glimpse of a familiar car speeding away from the warehouse. It was Aiden's. He hadn't said anything. Being followed was better than being imprisoned. Aiden held him tightly, his head buried in Caleb's chest as if terrified of losing him. Caleb had never seen him like this. No matter how angry he had been, the sight of this raw vulnerability extinguished his frustration. He shifted slightly, asking what was wrong. Aiden didn't answer, but the arms around his waist tightened. Caleb sighed and hugged him back. Aiden, he said softly, I'm not going to run away again. After spending 5 years together, he knew him too well. Aiden was back too. He squirmed upward until they were face to face. Curiosity got the better of him. How did you come back? Aiden's gaze traced every line of his face. I went to sleep, he said, and then I woke up. That was ridiculously easy. It seemed even reincarnation came with preferential treatment. Aiden kissed his restless head, murmuring his name. Caleb. HM? I love you. I know. Caleb broke free from his embrace and rolled on top of him. With Aiden's hair mussed and the hard edges of his demeanor softened, Caleb leaned down and kissed his forehead. I love you too, he whispered. Then, now and always, Aiden, I have been dreaming lately. The dreams are all of Caleb Thorne. I dream of him after he was thrown out by his family, holed up alone in a rundown apartment. I have people watch over him. I go to see him every day, but I never approach him. Because 30 years of my life have taught me that I am Aiden Sterling, the heir, destined to lead the family and produce the next generation. Then one day, I receive word that someone is causing trouble for him. I race over to find him in a fight, or rather, he is being beaten. Several men are holding him down. The air is filled with the dull thud of impact and the muffled grunts Caleb bites back. In that instant, my mind is consumed by a primal rage. I move on instinct. Holding his injured body, a voice in my head screams, "Take him home." And I do, watching him lie in my bed, unable to move from the pain. His eyes wide with curiosity as he looks at me. I feel a strange, possessive joy, until I wake up. I sit up and look at the photograph on my nightstand, disgusted with myself. What am I doing? Taking advantage of him even in my dreams? I dream again. This time it is different. I dream of Caleb lying beneath me. His expression, his pale skin, the sweet scent in the air. It nearly drives me mad. Why am I having these dreams? Caleb Thorne. Caleb Thorne. It's true. I want him. And then I see him in reality. For a moment, I think I'm hallucinating. But our eyes meet. He looks just like the Caleb in my dreams, right down to his mannerisms. He even raises an eyebrow in a subtle challenge. But as my gaze drifts lower, I freeze. There, just above his collarbone, is a small red mole, identical to the one from my dreams. Then it wasn't a dream. After seeing him in person, the dreams become more frequent, more vivid. They evolve. From his initial resistance to him actively wrapping his arms around my neck. He no longer tries to escape. He waits for me at home. We cook together, watch movies together. I can feel myself being genuinely happy. I begin to understand that this isn't a dream at all. I never expected Caleb to approach me willingly. This is nothing like the dreams. He cocks his head, his eyes bright and clear, his brown irises reflecting only me. I am incapable of refusing him. I bring him home. He is mischievous, like a small cat, constantly rubbing against me but always darting away just as I reach for him. He seems to be playing with me in a way that is both clumsy and endearing. I am becoming more and more certain that this Caleb is the same one from my dreams. He has the same habit of painting in the study, of curling up on the sofa with a bowl of nuts, the same expression when he watches movies. Realizing this, I want to test my theory. In the dream, my mother was vehemently against our relationship. Caleb seemed to dislike her intensely, so I have my assistant help me stage a little drama. I only want to see his reaction. I never expected him to be so forward. The little cat, afraid I might run away, jumps right into my lap. To prevent him from becoming suspicious, I do go to the family estate. I'm not there long before my nephew, Preston, finds me, saying he needs a favor. I have no great affection for my brother's son, especially since he once tried to put his hands on Caleb. But I see a flash of calculation in his eyes, so I agree. He takes me to a private club, points me toward a booth, and says he needs to use the restroom. I approach with suspicion. Through the partially open door of the adjacent booth, I see a woman draping herself over Caleb. I know it's a setup, but I cannot control the surge of fury that floods my mind.
Caleb sees me.
He scrambles to his feet, his face a picture of panic. I force myself not to storm in, turning and leaving the club instead, because I know Caleb will follow. 30 seconds after I get in the car, he is in the seat next to me. Jealousy and elation wage war inside me. I lose control and kiss him. Caleb. My sweet Caleb. My Caleb. That night, my dream continues. It is the 5th year of my life with Caleb. My battle with my mother has also lasted 5 years. One day, my mother calls, saying she feels unwell and asks me to stay the night with her. When I return the next day, Caleb is gone. He would not leave on his own, I know this. He must be in danger. I search for him like a man possessed. Finally, my mother finds me. She tells me not to bother. He is already dead. Even though it's a dream, I feel my heart being crushed. The suffocation is real. I don't believe her. As long as there is no body, Caleb is still alive. 2 months later, I find Leo Thorne, who has been smuggled into Africa. He tells me he threw Caleb into the ocean. I don't know why, but after 2 months of frantic, sleepless searching, when I finally hear the definitive truth, I accept it with a strange, hollow calm. My heart feels like an overinflated balloon, unable to shed a single tear. I order my men to break Leo's arms and legs and throw him into a fire. After returning to the States, I have my assistant compile all of Sterling Industries' current projects. I take the portfolio back to the family estate. I look at my mother, her hair now streaked with gray but her spirit as indomitable as ever. I told you, I say, my voice flat, not to touch him. My entire life had been planned for me from birth. I had so few choices. And now even Caleb is gone. I place the portfolio on the table and walk away without looking back. That night, I take a boat out to the stretch of ocean where he disappeared. And I jump. At least he'd gone out with a bang. I snap my eyes open. There is a familiar warmth in my arms. The overwhelming joy of having him back makes me clutch him tighter. Is Caleb alive? Thinking back on the events of the past few weeks, I understand. Caleb came back too. This is good. This is perfect. I trace the contours of his face, watching him frown in his sleep. I can't help but lean down and kiss him. So good, Caleb. We found each other again. And this time, nothing will ever take you from my side.